old anime. Yes, we got a few. What was that? Cowboy Bebop? All right, yes, sorry. I assumed everyone read the panel description. What we are here to talk about today, Cowboy Bebop, of course, classic anime. Most people have seen it. Some people it was their first. It was mine first. But, of course, in the tradition that we are now finding for Netflix, Hulu, all of these various streaming services are finding, okay, what can we do and how can we make it live action? Well, Cowboy Bebop finally got one. They've been talking about it for years. It was originally going to be a movie that Keanu Reeves was originally the big thing everyone was talking about to get in. Thank you. But after years and years in production hell, being unable to get that off the ground, finally Netflix went, all right, well, let's see if we can do one of those long or short form series that everyone is really enjoying these days. As for enjoying, I don't know if any of you have heard, as of yesterday, Netflix canceled it, which is almost unheard of. Netflix almost always gives any live action adaptation at least 2 seasons before they make a decision. Completely just, nope, absolutely not. And unfortunately, just left things on a cliffhanger. They decided that they weren't going to try and pack the entire anime into a single season. So it went for 2 and ended up losing that bet. That said, it actually did receive pretty good reviews from the critics. It was mostly old fans that had the negative response because it wasn't exactly like the original. In fact, there were some pretty big differences. Different characters, all of the characters were aged up a little bit. One of the odder ones that a lot of people had issues with, you've seen the original anime, Faye Valentine, one of the primary female characters, of course, has a very classic anime costume. It's a pretty skimpy little number of yellow vinyl, and they tried to make it work. That was actually a thing. You can find some production photos about it, but they were not able to make that original anime look work in real life. The main problem being, with an outfit of that material and shape and size, they weren't able to fit the padding that was required. They ended up giving Faye a lot more action scenes. They wanted her to be a little more of a fighter compared to how she was in the original, where she was more of a trickster type character. And they couldn't fit the padding needed for both the actress and for her stunt doubles. So they ended up trying to create a more modern look for it, trying to give it same sort of edgy vibe, but a little more wearable for an action star. Unfortunately, that was yet another thing that a lot of the older fans, when they were criticizing the new series, didn't like, was they were saying that she was being censored since the new outfit was a little less revealing. The other big thing that people had issues with were some of the changes in personality. Of course, one of those villains that is particularly memorable for a lot of people from the original Vicious ended up being significantly changed. They went in a completely different direction. I do have to say, before I go any further with this, the original director for the anime was actually hired as a story consultant for the new series. All of the voice actors gave their blessings on the choices in casting. All of the actors, Juncho actually grew out his hair and did all of this training to get the fighting style right. Of course, Spike Spiegel has the very particular fighting style. Absolutely phenomenal job, managed to really bring it to life on camera. But, like I said, Vicious was almost completely changed direction that they clearly were wanting to go towards in terms of who would end up being the primary antagonist of the series. And while it was a very interesting angle to go for, it was extremely different. If you go to watch it, which I would recommend, I actually did think it was worth a watch. It's nothing compared to the original, of course, but that would be a pretty tall order. Go into it with an open mind. You're not expecting to see the original story done again in live action. Quite frankly, that'd be pretty boring, right? You don't want to see the exact same story you've seen before. You want to see those same characters, but on new adventures. You want to see them going and doing things that weren't shown in the series. That said, this is also a version that is made to appeal to a more Western audience. Things like Jet's character being introduced with a family that he is trying to stay connected to, even though he's now living life as a bounty hunter out in the stars. And it works, it really does. The only thing is it's so drastically different. For a lot of people, that was just not okay, I guess. The other thing that ended up being an issue for some people was Ed. Ed was not listed in any of the casting when they were doing the trailers for the show, and it ended up being a thing that they wanted to leave that as a surprise. Again, clearly trying to build up to another season, which we are officially just not getting. That said, I have heard some speculation that the cancellation might be a publicity stunt in hopes of maybe getting a little more vocal positive feedback to try and counteract all of the very, very loud negative feedback that they've been getting from the initial release. In terms of other differences that we ended up with from the original to the new one, there was also the way that they shortened the importance of some characters. Quite frankly, it's a little harder to create an interesting character when you're having to deal with a live-action dog that can only do so much. They also created a different reason for Ein to be involved in the series, which was part of the changes that they made to Jet's character. But again, it was a perfectly reasonable way to tie that in based on other changes that they made. And it worked. Again, I just have to keep repeating this. If you're at all on the fence about it, I encourage people to watch it. It's worth it. You just really have to go into it knowing that this is going to be different and not expecting it to be completely the same. They do go more into the backstory of Spike and Vicious and their time in the Syndicate, which really works out well for both of those characters. It ended up being a much more colorful way to show these characters and to get us to like them versus spending all of this time with Spike alone and then getting these little snippets of his past. You can see where they were trying to do it all in a much shorter time frame. They didn't have quite as much time to slowly develop these bits and pieces about Spike's past and his history in the Syndicate. There is some phenomenal action in this. Of course, again, the animation in the original had such a distinct style, especially the hand-to-hand combat. They did amazing work. Some of them were direct homages to classic kung fu movies where they would do it almost kick for kick, punch for punch choreography. And they really tried to do that in the live action based off of the animation. There were times where it was shot for shot. The fight in the church between Spike and Vicious is, of course, an extremely memorable scene from the original. And in the live-action adaptation, they did it so beautifully. It really is a marvel to see them be able to recreate that, and the way that they were able to use that lighting and that beautiful stained glass, of course, as part of that classic imagery, and they were able to get it just spot on. I was extremely impressed by it, and I think anyone would be who's both interested in the story, but just interested in these animation to live action adaptations that we're seeing more and more of. The changes they made, talk about a few more character changes. The changes that they made to Faye's backstory is pretty much the same. We get introduced to it a lot earlier than we did in the anime. And it has a little more heart into it. They get a little more into the fact that she doesn't remember much about her life before. She can't remember who she was or what she liked. She doesn't know what her experiences were before she woke up. Okay, that is a character change in terms of a secondary side character. They changed who it was that betrayed her. To the better. This character, this side character, is absolutely phenomenal. They gave her like a fake mother who is part of this scam to take advantage of people that are coming out of cryosleep. Just an enjoyable side character, a minor villain of sorts, off again, on again. It really is. The characters that they added, I know that was another thing that a lot of people disliked, but the characters that they added were worth it in every instance. They really added something to the story. They took the original concepts of these story beats, of these plot lines, and extrapolated from that to create a character, or to create a situation that was more fully developed than the original, which chose to focus on different things. They're not necessarily things that weren't covered enough in the original anime. They were just something that was had potential to do something more with, and they really took advantage of that. One of the things with the casting, Juncho only agreed to do this series if they brought back the original composer. They did include some of the older songs, of course, for very key points, but they did covers of some of them, and of course she created some new music for the series, and it was only under the condition that she would return to create that iconic sound that Juncho agreed to do the series. And it was absolutely beautiful. She has such a unique sound, and once again managed to just knock it out of the ballpark. One of the other things that I guess it got paid for more internationally was in countries, of course, where they had to do foreign language dubs. They did not necessarily bring back all of the voice acting cast from the anime, and there were a lot of people that were kind of upset about that, including some of the prior voice actors who were disappointed to not be invited back. Whereas, of course, the English voice actors were all interviewed, asked for their blessing, approving of the casting choices, and so it was kind of a problem with Netflix, where people were saying they weren't giving the same consideration to foreign actors that they were to the English actors. Most notably, though, of all the voice actors to not bring in, they did not bring back the Japanese cast from the anime to dub over the live action for the Japanese release. Unfortunately, it also did not do very well in Japan in terms of audiences widespread. Again, the critics liked it, and it had mixed to positive reviews, but in the end, I guess the backlash was ultimately, when we're seeing these adaptations, because I'm certain this isn't going to be the last, the more and more we see these, some of them, of course, do end up getting very popular. This was not an example of one that was well received, but the ones that are, I guess I should make one point. It was not well received. It was one of the most streamed series on Netflix for this year. In the, what, it's been 3 weeks? 3 weeks since it premiered on Netflix. It has been one of the most streamed, of course, not to the level of Squid Game, which I am doing a Squid Game panel later. We'll get into what ended up happening there for Netflix in terms of streaming a show, but I digress. It actually did, a lot of people wanted to watch it. And so that is part of why it's so surprising. You would think that even if it did get these pretty negative reviews, that they still would have been even able to ride the coattails of the outrage. But suppose maybe they did feel like, oh, well, we don't want to ruin this for the fans if this is something that means that much to them. Dollar signs in their eyes makes me a little suspicious of maybe that intention. But as we see more and more of these, there is definitely an expectation from fans for these adaptations to be true to the original as much as possible. And I would argue that's not actually what the goal for these adaptations should be. That is part of the reason that I honestly enjoyed the Cowboy Bebop live action edition, is that ultimately it was telling a different story, both with the setting and characters that we're familiar with and that we like and that we enjoy. And when you have the idea of remaking something, why would you want to see exactly the same thing that you've seen before, but in a different medium? That's not going to really give you much substance in terms of satisfying that craving to see more of a title that you already care about and you already love. And I feel like, unfortunately, when people go into these, go into watching these series or these movies, and they're going into it expecting something very specific, they're expecting exactly what they've seen before, they're setting themselves up for disappointment. You have to go into it looking for a new experience with something you're familiar with. And so I really recommend not just watching this, but anytime you see one of these live action adaptations, go into it expecting a new experience. You might end up actually liking something that you wouldn't expect to. I'm pretty passionate about Cowboy Bebop. Like I said, it was one of the first anime I ever watched. It's a title that's extremely important to me. These are characters that are very important to me and that I've always cared about. And I've done that before, where I've gone into an adaptation of something or a newer version of something, and when it wasn't exactly like the original, when there were major changes in plot lines or character roles within a story, I would be really disappointed and I would end up disliking whatever it was. What made this work, what made this adaptation work, was the fact that I was going into it fully expecting a completely new experience. And that's what made it enjoyable. It is still that grungy, jazzy, New York meets the Old West version of galactic travel. It is this old world, new world sci-fi. It has that same sound. It has that same humor. It was in all of the trailers, so maybe you've seen it, but there's this great moment where, of course, Faye in the original and Faye in the new one kind of crash lands into the group and is taking advantage of them and trying to trick them. So, of course, at first, neither of them like her, but especially Spike. You know, in the anime has the classic line of like, there's only 3 things that I hate: kids, animals, and obnoxious women. So tell me, Jet, why do we have them all neatly arranged here on our ship? Well, they kept Faye that way. She is very obnoxious, she is very loud, and she is very willing to get her way no matter what it takes. They kept those core components of her character. And they kept the core humor that Spike is pretty much constantly a little annoyed with her. And so there's this bit where he's holding his gun to her head, and Jen goes, "You can't kill her, Spike. Just a little. I just want to kill her a little." It's got that same humor, but changed up just a little. It's a little less subtle. It's changed up to probably suit more of a Western audience, but it still has those key elements that you look for. And because of that, you're experiencing these same characters that you know and love, but you're experiencing them in a way that you've never considered before. You're seeing them through a broader lens. You're considering, again, Jet in this version is a family man. He is married, he has a daughter, he's divorced, but he still desperately wants to be in his daughter's life. He's always trying to do things for her, to get things from her. It adds a whole new motivation for him that in the original he didn't really have. He had the ex-cop angle, just trying to use his skills to make it in the world. But in this one, they give him more motivation to be the straight man, more motivation to be the one that says, "No, don't do that this way, Spike." Whereas Spike, of course, has the thing of he's still trying to avoid the syndicate. He's still trying to escape the life that he had. But they give him a little more direct cynicism, a little more of something where it's like, oh, okay, this is someone who is not just quietly fed up, someone who has been through the ringer and now is on the other side of that and has developed a very particular sense of humor based on being completely detached from the world. Oh, it looks like our panel has finally reached 3-star status. We could get KK in here. Anyway, here's one more. Where we at? We were just talking about how with any of these adaptations, Cowboy Bebop included, if you go in expecting it to be completely like the original, you are setting yourself up for disappointment.
Right, and I think that holds true for remakes in general, because if it was going to be exactly like the original one, there's not really a point of doing the remake. For instance, when they redid the theme song for the 2016 Ghostbusters movie, a lot of people said, "I don't like that, it's not close enough to the original." I said, well, listen to that one. You don't have to. This one's not for you. This one's for a completely different group. This is not so much a thing for the older fans to bring them back into it, because the people who used to be big into Ghostbusters are still big into Ghostbusters. Another movie is not going to make them more into Ghostbusters. They are trying to bring it into a completely new demographic. And so Cowboy Bebop is not going to be a direct shot-for-shot remake of the anime, because if it was, other than it having live-action actors, you're not going to get any more new enjoyment out of watching it.
Right. We were talking about how, in addition, this one's made a little more for a newer and also slightly more Western audience, that the humor is a little less dry, it's a little more direct, but it still has the key components. Faye is still a trickster that is constantly trying to talk her way into, a 70-30 split.
Right.
That Spike is still someone who's been through the ringer and come out on the other side and is just kind of annoyed and slightly amused with life in general.
And Jen is exactly the same, because the bedrock of your series can't change.
Talking about the one thing that Jet got was the fact that now he has a little more motivation other than just trying to use ex-cop skills to get along in the world, because now he's also, of course, got the motivation of trying to still be a good guy for his daughter, still trying to be a good influence while he's also a disgraced ex-cop who living as a bounty hunter who is always barely able to afford fuel and food. So
I think a lot of that might also stem from the fact that the original that all of us were familiar with from the late 90s, I was about to say, despite being made in the 1900s, comes from what we saw was translated from a Eastern perspective,
yes,
from a Japanese perspective, and while you can make something for a worldwide audience, it is always going to be attentive with the values and writing style that you have been most imbued in. And them giving a Western flair to it, I don't know if that was very intentional. I think it was just because it was made
Western
by
writers, Western actors. No, absolutely. It's just going to end up having a different style. But I was talking about the fact that they, Judge Show insisted on, bringing back the original composer. That she made new music for the series. That the original director for the anime was actually brought on as a consultant. Like Netflix hired him to come in and basically say, like, okay, you're making these changes, here's how that should play out. So even though these are changes, these are still working within the framework of these characters. It's just giving you a new perspective, it's giving you a new eye. And let's talk about that when you go into these adaptations, if that's what you're going in wanting, if that's what you're going in expecting, is I want to see these characters, these settings, but I want to see new stories with this. I want to see these things through a different lens. I want to see these different plot points further explored where they were kind of just set to the side in the original. And that is what makes these adaptations enjoyable. And that is especially what makes the Cowboy Bebop adaptation enjoyable.
Right, I agree with you. And there's, of course, we got the news yesterday that Netflix canceled the series. Did we talk about that?
Yeah, I brought that up at the very beginning, so I know there's been some people coming in and out. So
yeah, Netflix did announce yesterday that they canceled the series due to bad reception. Me personally, to me, it's got the vibe of publicity stunt.
Yes.
Because they did the same thing with Star Wars Rogue Squadron movie a couple of weeks ago, and they've just announced that it's back on.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I was really upset about that one because it's one of my favorite directors, and it was one of my favorite book series growing up was the Rogue Squadron novels, and I just y'all could be Jedi, I want to be an expert pilot. But in regards to Cowboy Bebop, them canceling it so soon after it coming out,
within 3 weeks,
I think is a thing of, no, we want to get people talking about this so that more people watch it. If more people are interested in watching it and they watch it, they're going to give it better ratings. If we get better ratings, we're going to get renewed for a second season.
And that was one thing I was talking about with the fact that it did get canceled, is also the fact that it was one of the most streamed series on Netflix of 2021, and it actually critically received mixed to positive reviews. It was primarily the fan response that was so overwhelmingly negative, and that's apparently what they cited for why they ended up canceling it within 3 weeks.
Which, honestly, I like. If you watch it and you think I don't like it, that's fine. You don't. Nothing's good for everybody. And if you didn't like it, I'm sorry it wasn't what you wanted. That's really frustrating for something that you really enjoy to get something new, and it's just y'all could have done something different, but you did that. And I'm not happy, but I still like the series. I'm talking about you, Stephen Moffat, Doctor Who.
Yes, we heard a boo out there. That is the correct response.
Stephen Moffat can write a really good Doctor Who story. The trouble is he wrote the same story over and over for 4 seasons. But that's a different panel called Don't You Think He Looks Tired? But I digress. Often. But if you are seeing something from a series that you like and it's But you do have to recognize, you gotta take that step back and recognize that you are experiencing someone else's artistic vision, and it's not yours, unfortunately. But that's why the good Lord invented fan fiction.
And that was one thing I was talking about earlier as well, is the fact that, like, part of what makes the new Cowboy Bebop series work, at least for me personally, is that even though characters got changed, even though characters got added, even though we got different versions of some of the old episodes, is the fact that the spirit of the show remained. Like, sometimes you get an adaptation that is so far removed that you're like, you clearly wanted to write something else and you just needed, like, some existing fandom to attach it to. That totally does happen. I mean, the Mario Brothers movie, the old one, that was not supposed to be a Mario movie, and then it just got tacked on there. So you do get those versions where it's like, oh, what were you thinking?
Oh, you were.
You were.
Got it.
But in this case, it really is part of what makes it work, and what I'm seeing in a lot of these more recent adaptations that are being made by fans. These aren't necessarily being made by just someone throwing money at something. Like, a lot of these are now being made by the generation that grew up watching these, or that watched these like when they were in high school, when they were in college, when they were at these formative years of media consuming, and you end up with a new version. This is them having probably thought about it, talked about it with their friends, come up with additional plot lines on it. Oh, wouldn't it be great if you had this attached to this character? And you end up with something that is different, but still has the spirit of the original.
The vibe.
The vibe.
The vibe is maintained.
The vibe check passes, and that's, I feel like that is what makes a good adaptation. When it is something that you are getting something new. Yes, it is completely different. Yes, the story is different. Yes, the characters are different. But the vibe, the feeling that you get from watching it is preserved in some way, shape, or form, so that even if it is a different experience, you are not getting something that is completely removed from the original other than in name. And I feel like they are getting better at that now.
I think a lot of what frustrated the fans that did not like it is the fact that, and we've had this conversation already, the fact that Vicious is so aggressive. He's not just the bad guy waiting in the wings that comes in, kicks ass, and leaves. He's emotionally unstable. He has a family tie to the syndicate. He's got a strong, I say stronger in the intensity, not so much the depth. A much stronger relationship with Julia and with Spike.
Yes.
I really enjoy the fact that they gave Spike the syndicate name Fearless, because his Vicious's father, the leader of the syndicate, kept telling him, you're a weak, scared little boy, and
Too vicious.
too vicious, and to call him scared and then call his partner fearless when he was an orphan that they pulled in off the street is just rubbing salt in that wound. I think giving him characterization in season 1 and then putting it into him was the right way to go, because in Cowboy Bebop, the vibe is our overarching villain is a cold and ruthless killer. This is not about emotion. And you can't be vicious without having emotion. Yes. But this is not about emotion. This is about, I've decided you should die, and that is going to happen.
The relationship between Spike and Vicious in the original is definitely characterized by both of them having this history together and this betrayal between both of them, feeling betrayed by the other, and this sort of cool, hey, remember that thing that happened last time? Yeah, I do. Well, I'm gonna have to kill you now. I guess that is what's gonna happen, huh? Or at least you're gonna try. And then in this version, they made it much more personal. They made it much more intense and more on the line for Vicious. It's not just a thing of like, oh yeah, screw you, we used to know each other.
And the scene in the church is no longer just a dramatic big scene because it is visually stunning, but because you have an emotional investment in it. But I personally think that it's like, no, Cowboy Bebop, there's supposed to be this cold, heartless person that is out for Spike, and that is a crucial part of the story. I think they are maintaining it as a crucial part of the story, and that's why they put Julia in charge of the syndicate. I think Julia is going to take Vicious's end of season place as, sorry, you gotta die.
And it ends up being a new way to look at these relationships that, again, it has that feeling of, I mean, who hasn't been in a car with a friend or hanging out and you've just watched something, you're going, oh man, there was such a missed opportunity for this, or oh, if they'd only done this, or oh, I bet, you know, behind the scenes this was going on. And a lot of the stuff that got added in here felt like that. It felt like people that watched the original and saw opportunities to add in more or to give a character something that would enhance, and especially, okay, let's be frank about this real quick. The female characters definitely got a lot more personality.
More personality than is female.
Yes. Even Faye, again, they kept her pretty similar, but with a few key differences that definitely made her, quite frankly, they gave her moments where she was being herself outside of her relationship to like Jet and Spike, which was nice. We gotta just go ahead and say that right out.
Yeah, that's hard to do when you've got 3 people living on a spaceship and they only talk to each other. But giving her moments to herself and discovering who she is rather than discovering who she was.
Yes, where she's trying to find out, but she does have a lot of stuff where it's just like, I don't remember, and I don't know that about myself.
What am I supposed to do? What is my script? What is my default action here?
Yeah.
And so she is
still finding those things out about herself.
Yeah. She is trying to be someone that she used to be rather than become a new person, and just those little beats of personality that are coming through. It doesn't really matter who you were before you went into Cryoslave.
And they made her a lot less damsel-y.
Yeah. And they let her pants.
Well, that was one thing I was talking about earlier. Again, we've had a little in and out, so face pants, in and out of face pants.
No.
That's where you're going with that one?
What was that episode?
Oh yeah, there was that one episode where someone got Faye out of her pants.
Yeah. Anyway.
There is, I was telling some people this, and again, we've had some people come in since I said this. They do have, you can find some pictures of it. There was production photos. They did originally have an outfit for Faye that was more like the original, more like the one because Spike's suit is spot on. It is perfect, like
almost cartoonish.
Almost cartoonish to its benefit. Like cosplayers have really, I think, forced Hollywood to up its game when it comes to adaptation.
I'm gonna interject here. There is, and it's usually an animation. I'm so glad they did it in this live action one. But anytime there's a gag where a character who always wears the same thing opens their closet and it's just copies of the same outfit, that is never not funny to me. And the fact that they went to the costume department and they were like, hey, let's get all the Spike suits at the same time and put them in this closet. And they did, and I ugly laughed. I ugly laughed when I saw it. I kept on it.
Plus, you can get a nice, clear look at how they did the collars.
Yes, that was a relief. But yeah, if you had a Spike Spiegel cosplay for the anime, you don't really have to do much.
No, there's almost no difference.
There's almost no difference.
And they tried to do that with Faye at first, but what they ended up finding out was that they wanted to give Faye a little more action scenes. They wanted to give her some more hands-on scenes.
And they wanted to give you PG-13.
No, that wasn't even a factor. I mean, the amount of blood and the violence and everything else, clearly ratings were that critical for them. But the big thing was because they wanted to give her more actions and fight scenes, they had to put padding into the suit. So like, you know, when they're, yeah, so her and the stunt doubles wouldn't hurt themselves. And with the outfit as it was, if they tried to make the original, there was no place to hide the padding. In every single action scene they tried to film with the original outfit, you could end up seeing the padding in like the arms and on the legs and everything. And so they ended up just going, no, you've got to try
it's almost like it's more sensible to be fully clothed when you're fighting someone.
To be fair, in the original she was a trickster and wasn't a fighter. But in this one,
so is Loki, he still wears clothes.
Sometimes. But yes, they decided to go for something a little more practical for hand-to-hand combat. But again, they really did their best to try and keep it within the same color palette, same kind of general cut. I mean, they couldn't get it that
dramatic.
Yeah, couldn't quite make it out of, you know, vinyl.
Can we just say that I don't know if Jet's actor just sounds like that, or if he's matching the original voice actor on purpose. I don't know. Hearing audio only, I don't know that I'd be able to tell them apart.
Yeah,
it was. He did a fantastic job. John Cho, I will say, in the way that, like, I read the Harry Potter books before seeing the movie, so I had a very specific mental image of what Harry looks like. And Daniel Radcliffe wasn't it. He's a good Harry Potter, but he wasn't the one in my head. John Cho was kind of the same way for me with Spike at first, until
because you were thinking about Keanu.
It's because I was thinking about Keanu. Listen, in the late 90s, they were working on a Cowboy Bebop live-action series, and Keanu Reeves was going to star in it, and this was like prime Matrix time.
Yeah.
And I was very excited.
And then it just ended up in production hell for decades.
Yeah. But John Cho was like, okay, no, this is a good Spike. This isn't my Spike. This is a good Spike. Until the scene in the fairgrounds, they do this shot of him walking where the camera continually falls, and as he's walking away, and he's just got that tall, slender figure, and he's got his hands in his pocket, and that's when it clicks. Okay.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Well done. Good job. I will say I did find it extremely funny that when we saw episode 1, we finished it, we're like, you know, they could have made his hair a little more fluffy. Like it's close, but it's not quite it. He did grow out his hair specifically for the role. That's not a wig.
Oh wow.
He actively grew out and fried his hair. Fried it to get that poof. Commitment. But they did have yeah, it's pretty goofy. And then in the last episode, after he's just been through hell, he's been through the worst of it. He's had his butt handed to him.
He's sleeping in a dumpster in a valley.
Yeah, it's rough. His hair finally looks perfect. I'm just like, you didn't know how to take it any worse from there, did you? So you had to dial it back so you could have it looking like that at the very end.
Yeah, I got to see in the anime, I guess the implication is that it doesn't actually look like that. His hair is just a representation of his emotional state.
They did have his hair looking very neat when he worked for the Syndicate in the new one. They tried to make that clear. It was originally a little more well put together before he was living that bounty hunter life.
All right, we are at the 10-minute mark, which means we've got to wrap up in about the next 5 minutes. Is there anything in here in particular that y'all would care to discuss? Then I'm going to talk about the music. Yoko Kanno is the person who wrote the music for the original Cowboy Bebop. They also did Wolf's Rain, they did Escaflowne, they did Darker Than Black. Any anime that person is attached to is worth watching solely for the music. Yes. Sorry, train of thought just went. A little derailed. But they came back for Cowboy Bebop and did not just use the old music. They re-recorded and remastered old music and did new recordings of older music, wrote some new music.
What's the name of the song during the church scene when Spike is
I am not sure of the name of the song. Say again?
Rain. Yes, thank you. Yeah, they did a new version of that.
With a high tenor male cover.
Yes.
And it just, the original wasn't bad, obviously. It is an iconic scene from just anime in general, art descriptor. But it really fit the feeling of the show extremely well. Just the commitment to, oh yeah, no, I've done this before. That was 20 years ago. It doesn't matter. I can do that now. It's like riding a bike. It's just orchestrated music.
That's all. Nothing bad.
Don't worry about it. I loved the live action intro. I didn't think they would be able to do that theme song in a live action version, and they just blew it out of the water.
They're like, okay, this is, again, they had a few key things. They were like, okay, no, this one's got to be 1-to-1. And that was one of the ones where they were just like, oh no, this has to be 1-to-1. And this may be a live action remake, but this needs to be exactly how we saw it.
And don't get me wrong, they always look a little cartoonish, but congratulations on finding the most picture-perfect, chubby little corgi in the entire world. Look, all corgis look fake. All of you can't look at a corgi and say that that's a dog. No, that's a robot that's made to look like a cute dog on TV. That's not a real animal. And it is.
That's the point of it. You almost have to wonder if it was airbrushed to get like the perfect markings and everything.
Right. But the corgi they got to play Ein is just stinking adorable. Of course, as we know in the original, Ed does identify as a girl. She says it in the movie, especially. Knocking on the door, and a guy in drag answers the door, like, oh, hello, little lady. That's not a little boy, that's a little girl. Girl, get out of here, kid, you're gonna ruin my reputation.
Well, those moms were like, this is so much more questionable than the original one.
Right. But in the new series, of course, we only have a few lines from Ed. We don't know how they identify. Jet uses male pronouns for them,
but that's when they don't know them as anything but Radical Edward, which was also in the anime everyone refers to.
But the actor for Ed is played by a non-binary actor, so I'm looking forward to them deciding, okay, JK, we are making season 2. So that. We're talking about the way that it came on so fast is a very publicity stunt-y.
So there is speculation.
Hope will out.
Speculation that it was just to drum up maybe some last-minute super positive support to try and get a season 2.
So anyway, yeah, if you haven't checked out the live-action version, definitely turn it on. If nothing else, the music's good in the background. I really enjoyed it. We watched episode 1, sat on it for a bit, and then watched episode 2, and then 3, and then 4,
and binged the entire thing in a night.
An entire thing. So it was.
Don't go into it expecting the original. Go into it expecting a new set of stories with the characters that you know, and in that same jazz New York meets the Old West sci-fi vibe.
Again, the vibes are immaculate. So feel free to check it out. We are going to head back. Y'all have another panel coming in soon. If you like Animal Crossing, we're doing another panel on that tonight. We've also got a Pokemon panel. Tomorrow we have a Good Omens panel. Sunday we have a Boku no Hero panel. Tomorrow night we also have a Squid Game panel.
Yes, I was talking about that earlier, was how Cowboy Bebop, despite the fact that it was not very well received by audiences, was still one of the most streamed series on Netflix of this year so far, with the exception of Squid Game, which Korea tried to sue Netflix over the streaming bandwidth.
They did because the internet service providers were having so much traffic.
They couldn't keep up with it.
They couldn't keep up with it, and they tried to sue Netflix for being good.
For overwhelming their systems.
Oh, no.
But anyway, yes, so that is our schedule.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm Ask the Cosplay Senpai. This is Callie Kate. We appreciate you coming in, and we will see you again.
See you guys later. Bye.